Good existence, everybody. Welcome back to JD's Pharmacopoeia. I'm JD. This is the Pharmacopoeia. Following off the back of my last video about the chemorphication of Hercules, that is the chemical Christing of Hercules, Apotheosis, or in a slightly watered down way, the drugging of Hercules, which led to his apotheosis. In a word, chemorphication. That is attributing divine-like traits, characteristics, properties, and attributes. Did I say attributes 3 times now? To chemical phenomena, processes, reactions. In the last video, we looked at Denaria. There it is. Denaria and her poisoning, specifically her anointing, but in the original Greek, the ekrion. The ekrion. That's it. That's it right there. The ekrion of the robes of Hercules, and specifically about her preparation of that and how she began to see something strange. What she said was beyond the power of words to describe, about how her wool that she'd soaked her poison, which she believed was a philtre, a love charm, into the wool absorbed this poison, and then she anointed the robes with it, and she dropped the wool into the sunlight, where it didn't spontaneously combust, but it melted into nothing and seethed and bubbled and turned into it just dissolved into specks, into particles like sawdust, she said. And well, if you didn't watch that video, go watch it, because that's describing a chemical process, and I'm hypothesizing more about the drug-fueled nature, the chemistry-fueled nature of antiquity, and how these processes, this chemorphication, which will ultimately lead to divinity, divine attributes. It will lead in many cases to immortality. It will lead into creating gods out of things that we can't understand. In a lot of ways, it'll lead to a lot of innovation and a lot of invention and a lot of new realities that just the ordinary man who doesn't have that secret teaching, that knowledge and that wisdom of how natural products can be put together and taken advantage of to really harness their properties into something that is just beyond ordinary physics. And we're going to continue with Hercules' story, otherwise originally known as Heracles. Heracles. And what happened with that robe, and how that robe is the Christ that killed Hercules. Or, it didn't kill him. That's the whole thing here. This is the Christ that turned Hercules into a god through an apparent torturous death. We're going to call that the Christing because it was an anointing. And if you look, I'll show you exactly what I mean. Let me make me small per usual. And that's the last slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Look, this is from Diodorus, Book 4, Chapter 38, a historical account of the gods. Specifically, this one is a lot of Book 4 is about Hercules and his 12 trials and tribulations. 100%. Again, recommend you read it. Anyways, we left off where Denaria she's beginning to realize that she had poisoned her lover's garb. And we're skipping a couple sections to get to the death of Hercules, but and we're going to a different source to get all the perspectives in. So a little bit has happened between here and there, but essentially he's putting on the robe at this point. And so here's where it happens. I'm just going to read it and commentate on it, as we go and point the Christings and the drugs out. At Sinaon, Heracles, wishing to perform a sacrifice, dispatched his attendant Lycus. Where's the Greek? The Greek is Lycan. Long I, short I. That's a long I. Lycan. To Denaria, his wife, commanding him to ask her for the shirt and robe which he customarily wore in the celebration of sacrifices. But when Denaria learned from Lycus of the love which Heracles had for Iole, I'm actually not sure. Loli, what are we gonna call her? If I can find her original name over here, I'll get you better. I'm just gonna call her Lol. 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 Lole. I'm gonna call her Lole. She wished him to have a greater affection for herself, and so she anointed the shirt with the love charm. That's our first Christ, anointing the shirt with the love charm which had been given her by the centaur, whose intention was to bring about the death of Hercules. If you don't believe me, ekrise, that is the Christing right here. Ekriste. That is the root kai rho iota of the word Christ, which we know means to anoint, to rub, to smear. We have the definition of the original meaning of Christ here. Creo, that's the lemma, the root that word ekrise and other forms of creo form. As you can see, there's different forms. Crisa, criso, ekchristane. What does it mean? It means to, of course, rub, as in anointing with scented unguents, sometimes done after bathing or to a dead body or a suppliant. It also means chiefly to rub or infect with ointment, particularly the anointing of one's arrows. And you can see Lucian here is saying from drugs. That word right here, pharmaco. Here we've got the definition for pharmaco. Where is it? We had it. There it is. Pharmaco. Drug, whether healing or noxious. Christ is a drug term, my friends. And here you can see that other word, enchanted, potion, charm, spell, philtre, often used to refer to the love charm that is being used here, which is simultaneously a death-inducing poison. Actually, not quite death-inducing, but it is a torturous poison from the centaur. If you don't know the whole story of Hercules, you really got to go listen to it. In one of the trials, he kills the Hydra, and the venom from the Hydra is collected and applied to Hercules' arrow, which he uses to kill the centaur. And the centaur then, just to explain this real quickly to you, the centaur then convinces Denaria that his blood contains a love-containing potion and that she should collect it in case she ever wanted to use it on Heracles. And she did, for some reason, trust this person who just tried to kill her husband. But she collects it, and she doesn't know that the poison from the arrow from the Hydra is in the blood of the centaur. And there's some myths. There's other accounts of this story where we find recipes for the oil, for the substance, for the pharmacon that is created. You can see here too. Pharmaco. There's that word pharmaco, which means drug. So this is a drug-based poison that is being Christed through the blood. And there are recipes and other accounts where semen is involved and olive oil and herbs that all contribute to the to the scene that we're about to see here. So that's important to remember, because as we're going to see with the effects of this pharmacon, with the effects of this drug, it's not merely a poison, but something very strange happens, which ultimately leads to his apotheosis. So you can see, let's go on, the death, whose intention from the centaur was to bring about the death of Hercules. Let me make myself small again, sorry. Lycos. Then, in ignorance of these matters, brought back the garments for the sacrifice, and Heracles put on the shirt which had been Christed. That is, this one here. Kekrimenon. That's the perfect middle passive participle of the neuter nominative accusative singular of the Greek verb kreo, meaning something that has had a substance applied to it and the effect is present still. Okay? That's kekrimenon. Kekrimenon. It's a beautiful form of Christing. Or it is the active of being Christed. And as the strength of the toxic drug, there's that word right there, drug. This is just to draw a link between the fact that Christ is a drug term. That's why we have this slide here. Christ is a drug term. We're going to drive that home in another presentation, but I just wanted to say, I mean, even in the definition of Christ, you've got of drugs right here. And even in the definition of drugs, you have Christ in here somewhere. I got to find it again, but it is beyond a shadow of doubt. There it is. Ek Christon. Let me get another epikriston. There's 3 Christs in the definition of drug. Anyways, let's carry forward. The toxic drug began. As the strength of the toxic drug began slowly to work, he met with the most terrible calamity. For the arrow's barb had carried the poison of the adder. That's the hydra, the serpent, the viper that he killed in the trial. And when the shirt, for this reason, as it became heated, just like that wool in the sunlight, attacked the flesh of the body. And there might be something here too about the moisture in the air and the skin, from the skin. Heracles seized with such anguish that he slew Lycus, who had been his servant, and then, disbanding his army, returned to Trachis. As Heracles continued to suffer more and more from his malady, he dispatched Lysmenius and Lolas to Delphi to inquire of Apollo the oracle what he must do to heal the malady. But Denaria was so stricken by the magnitude of Heracles' misfortune that, being conscious of her error, she knows now, she ended her life by hanging herself. The god, she killed herself because she killed her husband, but she didn't know he killed him yet. Well, I mean, in some cases she did, in some cases it was preemptive. This is an account of all the myths as given by Diodorus, again, a historian recounting the mythology. So, Apollo, the god, gave the reply that Heracles should be taken, and with him his armor and weapons of war, unto Oete, and that they should build a huge pyre near him. What remained to be done, he said, would rest with Zeus. Now, when Lolas had carried out these orders and had withdrawn to a distance to see what would take place, Heracles, having abandoned hope for himself, because he's in that calamity, the drugs are driving him mad. It had melted to his skin in some translations. It attacked the flesh of the body. They say that it melted to his skin and became like a glue so that he could not take this robe off. There was no way that he could get it off. And so, having abandoned hope for himself, he ascended the pyre and asked each one who came up to him to put a torch to the pyre. And when no one had the courage to obey him, Philostetes alone was prevailed upon, and he, having received in return for his compliance the gift of the bow and arrows of Heracles. That's got to be a typo for bow. The L is right next to the O on the keyboard. And arrows of Hercules, he decided to lighted the pyre, and immediately lightning also fell from the heavens, and the pyre was wholly consumed. Now, in some instances, the lightning strikes at the same time it's lit, and sometimes there is no lightning. Again, multiple stories going on, and this is a summation of them all. So not all the details are here, and some of them are. Anyways, this last section is the apotheosis. This is the chemorphication of Hercules, begat by his Christ. After this, when the companions of Lolos came to gather up the bones of Hercules and found not a single bone anywhere, they assumed, in accordance with the words of the oracle, he had passed from among them into the company of gods. Now, this is an important chemical clue. We, as investigators of ethnopharmacology, ethnobotany, ethnopharmacognosy, this is our clue here that there is something truly chemical happening. And I'm not doubting that something divine happened with that lightning strike and Zeus and the oracle foreseeing all of this. But we also must look at the chemical evidence, because what does it say? There were no bones anywhere. Why not? Even if lightning struck the pyre, even if there was no lightning, both instances, a pyre is a bunch of wood and flammable organic matter that when you light on fire, assuming it's dry, it's not going to burn hotter than 500 degrees Fahrenheit. 525 if you're lucky. And the reason why they can't find the bones, they say because they couldn't find the bones, that Hercules was assumed to have been lifted up into the domain of the gods. Why couldn't they find the bones? Why didn't they find the bones? The bones, they don't calcine. When you light bones on fire, when you incinerate, immolate a body, I forget the proper morgue terminology for this, but when you convert somebody into ashes, you can't just use a wood fire. You can't use a coal burning fire. You have to use something that is at least 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's twice the temperature of a standard fire. And so something happened here which caused the fire to burn so hot that the bones became ash, that they too disintegrated, not unlike that wool. Now, I have a couple theories as to why this happened. That is having to do with the chemical makeup of the robe that he wore. If this was truly an anointing, surely Heracles would have known if his robe was, if his ceremonial garb was simply smothered in blood and semen, right? Surely he would have known. There is, without a shadow of doubt in my mind, that there is a preparatory process to this Christing drug that we are missing out on. And one thing that sticks out to me is this ancient and modern chemical substance known as naphtha. That is naphtha, an organic solvent which is so highly flammable that it burns at sometimes 1,400 degrees Celsius. That's like over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, well beyond the temperate range for bones to calcine themselves and turn into biochar, as they call it. Turn into bone char. as they call it. Now, I mean, this is just some speculation. This is speculation because nobody mentions the naphtha. Nobody, unless you're going to the medical text, nobody's really mentioning or they're discussing the explicit directions on creating these drugs from antiquity. In fact, that's what makes a lot of these gods and goddesses, chiefly goddesses, divine, because they have this knowledge of how to combine natural products in a way that they can create seemingly mystical substances. These magi with their myrrh and frankincense, Medea, whose name is the origin of the word medicine, actually is famous for this Medea, for her oil known as Medea's oil, which contains naphtha and pitch resin, a substance that derives from trees. It is an organic profusion from the earth, which maybe I can get well, I don't need to bring any Wikipedias up, but point being that there are substances available. The Medea's oil is a combination of naphtha and tree resin, these highly volatile, high-burning, organic substances. When I say organic, I mean they are like oils. They're like fuels. They are diesel in nature. They're tar-like. They have come from the earth where the oil comes from, and they exude out of rocks and crevices and out of the sea. And the ancient people collected these things, traded them around that area. This is in Greece. The naphtha comes from the Black Sea and the Colchis region. There's without doubt they were trading these highly valuable substances around and likely using them. I mean, they were definitely used in medicine. We know this. Pliny the Elder dies. We know that these substances are being used in medicine because of the pharmacopoeias that are transcribing all these things. So my hypothesis, my speculation for the evening is that maybe naphtha was involved. Maybe naphtha was involved in the creating of this drug. We do this to this day. We use naphtha to create drugs, to dissolve things, to make emollients and the emulsified liquids, to blend things together that don't normally blend together. If you want to combine everything into one homogeneous solution, you need a solvent that is strong. And when we're talking about organic substances like blood, maybe semen, olive oil, you need something that you can dissolve all of that in and it becomes one substance. That's where the naphtha would come into play. And so that could have created some kind of emulsification. And that too would help with the bioavailability to permeate the skin's layer even quicker. And the naphtha is a sticky substance. It's volatile, but when it lights up and interacts with moisture and fire, it sticks. It's a hydrocarbon. Carbon attaches to other carbons. And that would explain why those robes stuck to Hercules' body and he couldn't get it off. That would explain why there was no bones left. That would explain why he was Christed into Apotheosis. That would explain the chemmorphication. I think that's all the notes I had for you on this. Why did it stick? Why were no bones found? What was on that arrow? What was in that love potion, I should say? What was in the love potion? There was chemicals. There was drugs that led to the I'm not going to say it was a misinterpretation. I'm not saying that because they didn't have knowledge of chemistry that they were misunderstanding the chemical processes and falsely layering godlike attributes, goddess-like attributes, mystical attributes onto these natural processes. Because for all intents and purposes, if you're asking me, as a chemist, as a knower of truth, what is natural is mystical. What is mystical is natural. Therefore, this apotheosis was a natural result of the magical workings of natural products. So that's all we have for this evening. That is the chemical Christ of Heracles' Apotheosis. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed that, got something out of that. Stay tuned. Stay tuned for more drug hunting, the classical literature, specifically a lot more Christ hunting. And that's it. JD's Pharmacopoeia. Thank you very much. Have a grand existence.